So I had mentioned before that the 1920s is sometimes called the Roaring Twenties, and I had argued that the 1920s is probably this roar is that of a monster under the bed. And because of the 1920s, we can see that there's a lot of social reactionaries, and what that means is that the society is changing, and there is a backlash against that change. There's this effort towards modernity, which is being fought against by the traditionalist society. And one of the areas that we can see that happening is with immigration policy and then racial politics. So the first thing that we need to remember is the 1920s is the time of intense nativism. Now, this is not Native American, but nativist American, nativism. This is the people that thought that America should be just for Americans. And at the time, because it was a dominantly white society, America should just be for white Americans, and that the United States should limit immigration from countries that were seen as undesirable. And at this time, that means there's a fear of radicals, radical being people that were from countries that didn't have democratic experiences, tended to be poor, tended to be less fluent in English, tended to dress in funny clothing, eat weird foods, that kind of thing. We call them new immigrants, and they tended to come from Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as all of the Asian populations were going to be targeted as well. In 1921, they passed the Immigration Act, which capped immigration at a total with 150,000 immigrants per year. Now, in 1920 and 1921, there was over 1 million immigrants just from these new immigrant populations alone. In 1924, they're going to pass another Immigration Act, which sets a quota. Now, a quota is a maximum number in this case. So they set the quota at the 1890s limit. So it was a 2% of the population of each ethnic group in 1890. So if there was 100 Italians living in the United States in 1890, which is before this influx of new immigrants, then 2%, so 2 people would be able to come in. The reason for that is intentionally racial, right? They did not want those new immigrants, Greeks, Italians, Russians, Eastern Europeans, to come into the country because they were seen as other. They were seen as not white. They were not seen as okay for the country. Germans, Irish, English, they're fine. They had high numbers before that targeting of the new immigrants. Now, we can also see that this is a time of a revival of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan in the 1860s and 70s was targeting, it was a Southern organization, and it was targeting Black and Republican voters in the South. But in the 1920s, we have a revival of the Klu Klux Klan as a distinctly nationwide white supremacist organization. It is a nationwide organization. A good chunk of the KKK was now focused in the Midwest, places like Idaho and Illinois, is devoted to maintaining white supremacy. And in 1924, there's 4 million members. You should also recall that it's the 1920s where we see this rise in the construction of Confederate monuments, because the Confederate monuments have nothing to do with the Confederacy. It's about maintaining and telling a story about white supremacy. Some call this militant patriotism. The Ku Klux Klan opposed anything that they deemed as un-American, which means that they deemed was seen as not supporting white supremacy. They were Protestants, so Catholics were seen as un-American, they attacked them. Jews were seen as un-American, they attacked Jewish people. Of course, the Black population, eventually the Mexican population, pacifists that they thought weren't going to fight for the country, bootleggers, prostitutes, gamblers, things that they saw as not following the law. They're going to use violence and intimidation, and especially political connections. They're going to change laws in order to maintain that white supremacy. So they're going to use violence and intimidation to keep people away from the polls, and then they're going to use politics to implement the policies and the legal structures that they like. Now, eventually the Klan falls apart in the mid-20s because the leader of the Ku Klux Klan committed a lot of the same shenanigans he was arguing against, but that deep-seated hatred is going to live on throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s.